Hold up. My views are my own. You heard it here first. You heard it here first. You heard it here first. Lightning round. Dangerously close. Welcome to My Views Are My Own podcast. Today we have a lecturer of political science from the University of Michigan, author of The Political Right and Equality, and co-host of Edgelord podcast. That's right. Matt McManus is back on the podcast. Matt, before we get started, I want to let you know something interesting. I didn't go through like every single episode that came out in 2023, but I am fairly certain you had the most downloaded and shared and listened to episode of the whole year. Isn't that wild?
Yeah, that's crazy, man. Honestly, I had no idea that so many people were fucking interested in postmodernism and Philip K. Dick, but there you go, shows what I know, right?
Well, that was actually, and here's the thing about that one. Like, so I was just reading your article. You'd written an article called "The Enduring Relevance of Philip K. Dick," and I was like, "This is fascinating." And I reached out to you like on Twitter back when it was still Twitter, and I
Yeah.
was like, "Hey, man, would you be down to talk about this?" And I was like, I was, sometimes when I do an episode, I'm like, "Okay, I'll do this because I think a lot of people will like this," and sometimes I do an episode because I'm like, I will like this, and this is something that I'm purely interested in for me. And that was the thing about it, man, is like when I was reaching out to you, I was like, there's probably like not a huge number of my listeners that are going to be, or they're going to want to share this with a lot of people too, because it was kind of dense, a little bit intellectual. And yeah, that thing went just blew up. I was like, within a week of coming out, I was like, damn, this has been downloaded more than anything that had come out in the months prior. So anyway, man, I just wanted to blow some smoke on you a little bit to tell you how fucking how well received you were last time, and I'm so glad to have you back on the podcast.
Well, man, that's nice to hear, right? Honestly, like I've given up trying to fucking figure out what people are going to want to listen to. I just do my best. And I'm like, this seems kind of interesting and kind of neat. But in the end, I thought we had a great conversation and we covered a lot of ground. And Philip K. Dick and postmodernism and all the shit that we talked about are obviously really really intrinsically interesting things. So it's great that so many people connected with it.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, when you reached out to me about your latest book, sorry, let me just go ahead and read it. The full title: The Political Right and Equality, Turning Back the Tide of Egalitarian Modernity. That is a mouthful. Uh,
Yeah.
I was absolutely 100% on board. Like, I was like, yo, let's do this again. Let's get Matt McManus back on the podcast. We got a lot of ground to cover, and not nearly as much time as I would like. So, just man, let's start simple. What does it mean to be on the political right?
Well, what I argue in the book is that a very well-known economist called F.A. Hayek was right in his assessment of what the right is about, to point a bad pun, where Hayek says, if you're a conservative, you're on the right, then you're fundamentally committed to this belief that in any given society, there are recognizably or demonstrably superior people, right? And the proxy of that is that there are also way more recognizably inferior people in society. And this abets a kind of hierarchical mindset where you think, look, some people are entitled to more status, more wealth, more political power, more of all the good things in life because they are superior in certain kinds of ways. And everyone else, it's not that they should suffer unduly, right? But they're just not entitled to the same kinds of things. So this is the kind of outlook that I say characterizes conservatism or the right. Or to put it another way, James Fitzjames Stevens, who wrote a very famous critique of a philosopher called John Stuart Mill, once said, the essence of a good society is recognizing that to obey a real superior is a great virtue, right? With the question being, what is a real superior? But everyone on the political right believes that there are real superiors out there, and most people should defer to them.
That's a great definition. I think you in the book you kind of make a reference saying that that which unifies the right is the belief that there are inferior people who are undeserving of equality. Like that's the glue. Because I guess, I mean, when you say the political right, you are talking about many different
Oh yeah.
factions and groups, and they're not all the same. And, if the world was slightly different, they would be at war with each other. And I mean, God, I mean, hopefully, I mean, it appears that way, that even right now they are a bit at war with each other. You know, one could only hope that that will escalate. Um, and your book, so here's a, I'm gonna, this is the part of the podcast where I'm gonna start to really demonstrate some of my ignorance, but you know what? I'm here to learn, man. That's the point, right?
Oh, hey, so was I, man. Honestly, back in 2016, when I started researching the shit, I knew very little about the political right or conservatism. I've been at it for almost a decade now, so I'd say I've brushed up on it pretty well, right? But it's one of those topics where everybody thinks you know, or you kind of have some familiarity with it. But if you're not actually in those circles, it can seem a little bit opaque if you actually think like, well, how would I define this? What are its main parameters and stuff? So part of what my book is intending to do is give people who maybe don't know too much about it a primer on what these people are about.
Yeah, and I think what I was about to get into is some of the historical references, and that's actually where some of the names I don't recognize. They're not immediately familiar. Because I think for most people, like someone like myself, like I am absolutely consider myself anti-fascist, but I would like to be more knowledgeable about what I'm saying. So, when I think of like the extreme, right wing extremism, you first you think of Hitler. Everyone first thinks of Hitler,
Mhm.
yelling and screaming and being a monster. And then in modern times, you think of like Donald Trump being like, they're sending the Mexicans across the border, and it's just like, and it's weird because he's so clownish, and so it's easy to dismiss them as this kind of like clown led group of people. But anyway, as the book does, goes back in time, and it's you do like an intellectual history of the conservative and reactionary tradition, and you go back to Aristotle. My question is, how is Aristotle considered a right wing figure?
Well, there's two things I want to say. First off, it's very easy to sit there now in hindsight and say, Hitler was this horrible monster. And, we need to take what he did very seriously. And I want to make it clear, we do need to take what he did very seriously because he was a horrible monster. But you flash back to the 1920s, a lot of people also thought he was a fucking joke in Germany, right? Not just, randoms, but, very intelligent, very well-connected people. They figured nothing is going to come from this, right? And that's because there are a lot of things about fascism that are inherently very funny, sometimes self-consciously so, right? But
Yeah,
just because something is funny or ridiculous doesn't mean it can't be threatening or genocidal, as we saw in the case of the Nazi movement, right? But the reason I went back to Aristotle as the kind of first person in my book, well, there are two reasons, right? One, Aristotle is just a really important thinker, right? There's no doubt about it. Some of your readers might know Dante, for Dante's Inferno, right? So in Dante's Inferno, he actually throws a lot of good people into hell. The virtuous pagans, as he calls them. These are people, who wrote and thought before Christ was born. So kind of bad luck if you were born before, the Common Era. But Aristotle is there in limbo, and Dante calls him the master of those who know. Right, pretty high praise, right? Especially for somebody who's in limbo. And this just goes to show you the impact he's had on Western thought and indeed Islamic thought generally, right? So it's important to start with Aristotle just because that influence is so palatable. But the other reason why I started to start with him is because a lot of people on the political right have this real nostalgia for a vision of the world that I argue Aristotle articulated really well. And throughout his career, and this is a vision of the world that's very much hierarchical, right? Where, at least in a certain reading of Aristotle, I don't want to stress there's left-wing readings of Aristotle also that I'm sympathetic to, like Marx and Narcissus Martha Nussbaum's. But on the right-wing view of Aristotle, he develops this view of nature as hierarchical. There are higher and lower orders of being. There are higher and lower orders of animals and various forms of life, and there are higher and lower orders of people, right? And Aristotle makes this pretty clear in the Politics, right, where he says some people, mostly Athenian aristocrats, possess a lot of what he calls deliberative reason, basically a capacity for highfalutin thought, right? And these are the people who should be in charge of most Greek polises because they possess the capacity to actually rule effectively. And then there are people, he says, that have some degree of deliberative reason, mostly women, right? And they should have a certain amount of say in how things go, but not too much, right? Because they don't have the same capacity for deliberative reason that a well-educated Athenian gentleman would. And then at the very bottom, he says, look, they're also just natural slaves, right? These are the kinds of people who, don't read, can't think about, things abstractly, have no idea what's going on outside of, their own narrow purview. And their job, of course, is to clean the toilets and, take out the trash in society, because every society needs those people. And they shouldn't have any kind of significant political or private rights, right? They should more or less just follow the orders of the people who do possess deliberative reason, because they know better how their lives should be lived and what kind of projects politically they should commit themselves to. And this maps on to a social vision that the philosopher Charles Taylor calls hierarchical complementarity. This idea basically that society is a pyramid, right? There are people at the top, and then there are people in the middle, and then there's a lot more people at the bottom. And every rung of that pyramid needs the other rungs, right? It's not like you can take the bottom rung away and the structure will stand. But people at the top possess clearly more dignity, more authority, more wealth, more power than those at the bottom, right? And from a certain kind of reading of Aristotle, again, this is taken to just be natural, and not just natural, but necessary, right? Society can't function without people at the bottom, cleaning the toilets, and people at the top giving the orders and spending the money, right? And this view of how society should be organized was actually the one that was predominant for a very long period of time, right? If you're listeners read watch Game of Thrones or any of those kind of medieval TV shows, right?
Yeah.
The feudal system models this really nicely, right? Where you have peasants and serfs at the bottom, knights, lords, and a few merchants, in the middle, and then you have the king and sometimes religious authority at the top. And it's really only with the advent of liberalism or liberal thought, inspired by a lot of different things like Stoicism and certain forms of Christianity in the 17th century, that you see a different view of society emerge. One that Thomas Jefferson understood pretty well when he said, no, actually all people are created equal, or all people are born equal. So it's from the standpoint of equality or human equality that we need to start to think about politics, rather than the old way of thinking about it, which was to insist that no, actually all people are unequal at the start of their life and they become more unequal over time.
Okay. Yeah. And it's funny just thinking. I don't often just sit down and pick up a book of Aristotle and just read it at this point in my life. But I was obviously made, everyone pretty much, that gets a standard American public school education gets, reads some Aristotle. But I guess they really clean it up. They really clean up some of that whole there are natural slaves rhetoric that he apparently was
Yeah.
saying, because you get more of just the whole yeah he invented reason and logic, or whatever it is that they're trying to.
He had a big influence even on American slavery, right? People in the American South used to cite Aristotle all the time because, he was a very prestigious figure. And they'd say, look, he says they're natural slaves. So what are people getting so much into arms about when it comes to our slave system? It's natural. Aristotle says so.
Man, that into my head just now popped like an antebellum gentleman, at a cocktail party going, Aristotle, just
Yeah.
I do believe I would quote Aristotle in this argument we're having here, sir. and then just
Yeah.
and then slap him
Twirling
with a
old
glove and
fashioned.
do a duel. The only thing I think we should bring back is duels. Duels,
Yeah.
those were not necessarily a bad idea. Moving forward to some more, just some historical people that you cite. This is so obviously I knew who Aristotle was, although I was unfamiliar with his standpoint on slavery. You also cite other historical figures that I have to admit I'm unfamiliar with, most of them. Who was Alexander Dugin? I feel like I know the name sounds familiar. Why is he important?
Well, it's who is Alexander Dugin, because he's still very much alive and tweeting and going
Oh,
on
he's a
Facebook.
he's a modern figure. Okay, I thought he might have
Oh
been.
yeah. So Alexander Dugin is sometimes called Putin's brain. He's the one of the major philosophical figures on the Russian right. Now, whether or not he actually influences what Putin does or Russian foreign policy, there's a lot of debate about that, right? Some people say that actually Putin does take his ideological cues, at least from Dugin and his circle. Other people say, Dugin's kind of a useful idiot for Putin, right? But long story short, Alexander Dugin came of age during the fall of the Soviet Union. He was really attracted to various kinds of ultra-right movements, like Russian fascism, while the Soviet Union was in power. But he says that, actually after the Soviet Union fell, even though he was very opposed to communism, needless to say, he nonetheless missed it because he missed the time period when Russia, was a great power, on par, or at least, right behind the United States, able to exercise its might around the globe, because he felt, that the country had been humiliated, right? It had been broken apart. It had lost the Cold War. The country descended into chaos, as, capitalism or shock capitalism was really rapidly introduced. And a lot of people lost their jobs and their livelihoods and their savings, you name it. And he started to try to develop a new kind of ideology that he felt would help restore Russia to the greatness to which it was entitled. And this was first articulated in his big book, Foundations of Geopolitics, where he talks about how there are countries of the sea and countries of the land. And America, along with Britain, are countries of the sea. And they've been dominant for a long period of time. And they tend to be attracted to things like liberal values, universalism, cosmopolitanism, because, seafaring countries, they interact with a lot of people. They tend to have this mercantile attitude towards them because they're very focused on trade. And you know how trade is, right? You're not going to get very far if you look down on somebody you're trying to make a bargain with. The idea is that you're supposed to benefit, I'm supposed to benefit, and we need to treat each other with a certain degree of mutual respect, even if, it's kind of instrumentalized. By contrast, countries of the land, according to Dugin at least, tend to be more nationalistic, more spiritual, more focused on things like, the homogeneity of the people. And he argues that, in order to restore Russia in this kind of fascist way, what we need to do, or what Russians need to do, is form alliances with a lot of very ultra-right forces around the globe, right? Militant Islamists, white nationalists, a whole array of like neo-Nazi and fascistic movements in Europe in particular, and use them to kind of undermine American power, to create a space for a new kind of Eurasian empire that's going to form, that'll become the new global hegemon. So that's his Foundations of Geopolitics, right?
Yeah.
Later on, like contemporaneously, he's published a few different books on political theory, most notably a book called The Fourth Political Theory, and a couple of books on a philosopher called Heidegger, where again he argues for this need for national renewal on Russia's part, warring against decadent liberal egalitarianism, and putting a stop to what he sees as the creep of liberalism eastwards into Russian territory. And this is one of the reasons why, for instance, he's been very supportive of the Ukrainian invasion that took place, not too long ago, because he feels that Ukraine is liberalizing at the behest of the West, and the United States in particular, and Russia needs to put a stop by that by restoring its empire, by retaking parts of the Ukraine.
Yeah, and that I don't want to dive too deep into this. Obviously, I was going to assume that this guy was absolutely pro the annexation of Ukraine back into Russia, or maybe in his truly ideal scenario, a new Soviet Union. But I get confused because uh, I, some people have made the argument that NATO has put Russia on the defensive. I don't know. I'm not like a geopolitical, mastermind as to who, like
Yeah.
who is always, I think there might be aggressors on more than one side of this. But yeah, okay. So Alexander Dugin turns out to be a modern right-wing thinker in Russia. Did not know that. Now I do.
Modern
Uh,
fascist, I should say, right? I mean, we can get into the distinction between fascism and conservatism, right? But in terms of his aspiration to establish a new kind of Russian empire, this feeling that liberal and left-wing forces have undermined, Russia's strength, and they need to be eliminated, and this idea that decadent liberal ideas about personal freedom undermine, the solidarity of the nation. That's all, pretty fascistic. Not to mention, just the sense that, war will help restore, the nation to its preeminence in the world, right? I mean, you can go look at his fucking Twitter if you want. A lot of it is just stuff like kill, 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 bomb the shit out of them, just
yeah.
demolish, the Ukrainians, right? It's really violent and very fucking pathological stuff.
Okay. Well, can't necessarily say that I will go check out Dugan, but Now I know who the fuck he is, and I hope to never meet him.
No, yeah. I mean, he's not a nice guy. Let's just put it this way. If I fucking saw him at a bar, we would not get beers together.
No, no. He would get what's that thing they call in Ireland? When it's a problem over there. It's where it's I think it's just calling getting pinted. It's where they
Okay.
take a pint glass. It's like a very common like bar fight thing that happens in Ireland where someone just takes a pint glass and just smashes it on someone's head. I think it's like it's so fucking common that it's like, that it has a term,
I don't know, but yeah, he would fucking deserve that if anybody would. Let me just tell it that way.
All
Yeah,
right,
straight up.
Alexander Dugan, if you're listening, you better watch the fuck out if you're ever in an Irish pub with me, homeboy.
Yeah.
But anyway, as you were saying, so yeah, Mr. Dugan is nostalgic for the Soviet Union, although he hates communism. He's nostalgic we could say for him, he's nostalgic for the power,
Oh
the
yeah, definitely.
opportunity. But let's just say, I think nostalgia is an enormous aspect, is an enormous, driving force behind all these movements, whatever country they may be living in. And you mentioned that far right extremism is nostalgic at its core. Uh, Other than like Dugan, he's nostalgic for fucking the Soviet Union. What are far right extremists like? What are they nostalgic for in general?
Well, one of the things that differentiates the far right from, say, mainstream conservatism is mainstream conservatives tend to want to do just what their name says. They want to conserve, right? They're like, look, society as it stands right now is imperfect and probably always will be imperfect, but it functions reasonably well. And the thing that conservatives want to guard against are radical efforts to reform or transform it, right? Once you get onto the far right, what you start to see people say is, no, actually, society as it stands right now is really fucking bad, right? It's decadent, it's decayed. We've fallen away from some state of grace that existed before. And what we need are actually radical moves in order to bring society to the ideal that it should aspire to, right? Now, the far right is a very fucking weird place with a lot of bizarre people, right? I mean, just go watch, Vice News or something if you want. Or just fucking look at a newspaper now, right?
Yeah.
With all the QAnon shit, right? And you can get a flavor for that, right? But fascism, as a particular form of far right politics, and there are more far right politics than just fascism, has this very particular kind of nostalgia that, oddly enough, is very future minded, right? So I agree with the great historian Roger Griffin, where he characterizes fascism as what he calls a kind of palingenetic ultranationalism, right? Now that's a complicated, term, but what it basically just refers to is this idea that, look, everyone is part of what he calls the ultranation, right? The ultranation doesn't necessarily have to be confined to the boundaries of the nation state. It's a people, right, that once had a glorious past, right? Or ruled a glorious realm. Think about fascist Italy, with its appeals to the Roman Empire, right? We once dominated the Mediterranean, or Germany, right? This idea that we once dominated Europe. But then the fascist comes in and says, but we've lost our way, right? The nation has declined, and it's been allowed to decline because of the presence of these very decadent, destructive forces, which are almost always on the left, right? Liberalism has led people to think that, everybody should just be allowed to do whatever it is that they want without committing themselves to these grander national projects. Socialism and communism are even worse in a lot of ways because they focus a lot on, the lowest orders in society, and they're universalistic at this kind of cheesy belief that everyone should be treated well regardless of whether I'm part of this nation or that nation, and these forces needs to be expunged, right? And they can only be expunged if we commit ourselves to the fascist movement, and to obedience to a leader type figure, right? Almost always a man, although increasingly there are some women or female fascists who seem to be assuming a leadership role as well, which is pretty worrying. And the leader says that you join me and I'll expunge these decadent leftist forces through any means necessary, and I'll restore the ultranation to its former glory. Right? We'll build a new Roman Empire, or we'll gain Lebensraum for the German Reich, or and Spain with the Phalangist movement. Right? We'll create a new North African empire, and we'll purge the Republicans, whatever it happens to be. Right? And this always involves violence, concentration camps, this feeling that there are enemies everywhere and they all need to be dealt with through a suppression of individual liberties. But it can be very appealing for at least some people, because it combines this feeling of populist desire to belong, right? Feeling like I am part of a great people. I'm not just alone, right?
Yeah.
With a very elitist sense that, well, I want to belong and I want to be part of a people, but we're a better sort of people than everyone else, right? We're not just part of the human race. We are part of this great nation, right? Or a great imperial group. And we've been denied our entitlement to rule, basically, over huge swaths of the human race. There, but for the presence of these liberal and leftist forces, we would be kings of the world. And that can be really appealing for a lot of people, and explains why fascism, in a lot of different permutations, always seems to creep back up, no matter how many disasters it produces.
And that's and they like to have their cake and eat it too, with the whole, because they love to be victims. They love to
Oh, yeah.
talk about their victimhood constantly, how they're victims of society, they're victims of the deep state, they're victims of the liberals, they're victims of people that are transgender. You fucking, it just goddamn goes on the list of people who have wronged them, and
I mean, even fucking Disney mermaids at this
uh,
point, right? I mean, like, you
uh,
fucking put a black mermaid in a Disney movie, then goddamn, isn't that just, undermining them in some
I
way, right?
I have never felt so victimized in my life as when they made a new Little Mermaid movie. But also, moving past the, yeah, but they're constantly victims, and yet simultaneously they are the most they're the strongest, smartest. They've always got video, like the politicians. They always got videos where they're firing off a fucking machine gun and being
Yeah,
like, oh yeah, how many fucking liberals I could kill in 5 minutes,
yeah.
so they're somehow superhuman and victims. So yeah, they really love to play that game. I have a little analogy, and I don't know if maybe this will help, because maybe I lump a lot of these people in together, and I think it's wise and good that you kind of steered me towards differentiating between what we might call just a kind of a normal conservative person and a far right extremist or fascist. Let's say, for me, for instance, I consider myself an environmentalist and a
Sure.
conservationist, and like I have, let's say there's a national park that I love and I want to conserve it. I don't want it to change. That would be me being a regular conservative. And it's even almost the same word. But if I were more of a, let's say an ecological fascist about it, I would say that all surrounding cities, suburbs, and any kind of human habitation that exists anywhere near this state park should be bulldozed, or bombed and replaced. And the forest should be moved into those areas as well. Does that fit the? Is that a kind of a way to put it? I don't.
Oh yeah, no, that absolutely works, right? And I mean, look, everyone can have certain kinds of conservative inclinations at points, right? We sit there and we want to conserve the environment, like you said, and it's worth noting that in the 1960s and the 1970s, many conservative movements around the globe weren't as radically anti-environmentalist as they are right now, right? Some of them made exactly the argument you did, right? Like, look, we need to conserve nature, for future generations. And then, big oil companies got involved and, they co-opted a lot of these parties and movements and stuff, and they became radically anti-environmentalist. But I think, the one thing I would add to your analogy would be a fascist would say it's the decadent immigrant populations living in those towns that are undermining, our nation and have led to the destruction of our environment. And they're always going to do that because these people are wasteful and virus-like, and that's why we need to bomb them, right? Because again, this projection of otherness onto much of humanity, the suggestion or the implication that they don't belong and they can never be part of the nation or the people because they have some recognizable sign of inferiority that is both threatening and demeaning, right, is so essential to the fascist mindset. And this also plays into what you were just talking about this weird habit of simultaneously being a member of an elite while also presenting as a victim. A lot of people have pointed out that this is a kind of contradictory set of impulses, and in a lot of ways it can be, right? But it's also very powerful and very emotionally cathartic to feel that way at the same time. Because a lot of these people think like, look, deep down, I am an elite, right? I am an aristocrat. I do belong to the Aryan race is Superman, or I'm one of Nietzsche's superior people, or
Yeah.
Ubermensch. But the reason why people don't recognize that is because we live in a society that's so fallen, and all these left-wing people are persecuting me, undermining me, taking away the privileges and status that I would enjoy if I were in a society that wasn't torn down in this way. So this feeds into those feelings of elitism and persecution. And it's a very toxic mix that nonetheless can be really appealing to a lot of people because
Yeah.
nobody wants to feel just like a victim. It's a lot more seductive to think, really, I am a king, but I haven't come into my kingdom yet, but boy, I will one day. And then
Yeah.
I'm going to take revenge on everybody who's wronged me.
Yeah. I'm an Ubermensch, but nobody would let me be an Ubermensch. I would like to add just one small caveat. It is off topic, but I feel like I just want to go ahead and put it in there. Going back to my analogy about environmentalism, I do want to say that that wasn't just hypothetical. I do absolutely believe that a lot of developed areas should be rewilded and used to create forest corridors. Uh, that's a topic for another day. Just want to say that I don't. I didn't want that to come across as though I thought that was a bad idea.
Oh, no, yeah, definitely. I mean, look, everyone should be an environmentalist at this point, right? I mean,
Yeah,
we owe it
yeah,
to future generations, not to mention to ourselves, to be able to have fucking clean drinking water, if nothing else. I live in Michigan right now, so there are people in the United States where that's not even a guaranteed thing because there's so much pollution put into the water, right? We shouldn't be having that at this point.
and especially hey, if you are a some kind of like racial purist, fucking I hate immigrants type person, guess what? Uh, Climate refugees are going to be a thing, and you might be one of them. So you might end up having to go someplace where not everyone is a Snow White weirdo, and you're not going to fit in there, and they're not going to like you. So maybe get put yourself in someone else's shoes for once. Uh,
Yeah, no
okay,
kidding.
this is we've already discussed Alexander Dugin. It's kind of one of the first intellectuals on the right. Quotation marks. I don't know how much of an intellectual this fucking guy is, but Trump is clearly the figurehead of the right wing movement in America. He's the
Oh, yeah.
most famous guy you're gonna think of when you think of this shit.
Probably
Uh,
the most famous guy in the world right now, man. I mean, honestly, like,
yeah,
however fucking tired a lot of us might be of hearing about him, if you fucking put his face in front of anybody on the planet, they'd probably know who he is, right?
he could potentially be more famous than Taylor Swift at this point. But
Oh, yeah,
obviously,
it's a tough question. Yeah.
did you see? I'm not a Taylor Swift fan, but I'm a fan of people accomplishing awesome things. And I don't know if you saw that thing. She created she did a concert in Los Angeles at the former Staples Center, and it was measured on the Richter scale because the audience
Yeah.
went so fucking wild. Go her, man. You know what?
Yeah, I
I'm a
heard
fan of
that
that
her
kind of.
tour is apparently going to make more money than entire countries' GDPs. So she's basically like fucking like a she's a significant part of the U.S. economy at this point, just Taylor Swift, and fucking good on her, right?
Yeah.
Forget that point.
Back when she was not back when she had only had like her first hit song. I'm proud to say that I served her some chicken at a
Did you?
restaurant that I worked at. Yeah, I worked at. She was very, very polite to me at the time. I hope she's still cool. Anyway,
That's it. Yeah.
moving away from Trump, because obviously people don't consider Trump an intellectual. And so I'm kind of curious, like who are the modern right wing intellectuals? Like who fills these roles and what are their objectives?
Sure, that's a great question. So I have a piece that came out in the magazine in these times a few days ago, right? Where I talk about the new three-legged stool that's emerging on the right. So for your listeners who might not be familiar, in conservative circles in the United States between the 1950s and now, people use this metaphor of a three-legged stool to describe what made up the American right or the coalition that made up the American right. And the three legs of the American right or the three legs of the stool were usually taken to be social conservative, mostly white evangelicals, usually who are opposed to things like civil rights movements. So there were social conservative evangelicals, mostly white, who are opposed to things like the extension of civil rights, feminism, the LGBTQ movement. Basically, were moral crusaders against movements demanding certain kinds of social equality. Then the second leg of the stool were libertarians, broadly speaking, right-wing libertarians, who felt that the New Deal and various kind of welfare measures were either economically inefficient or they gave too much to the undeserving, or both, right? And then the third leg of the stool through a lot of the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, and up to the 80s, were anti-communists, who later mutated into neoconservatives, right? These people who felt, we need to take a harder line on things like terrorism, intervene in these countries, etc. And this coalition was really viable in the United States for a long period of time.
This was
It
kind of
was
that was kind
extreme.
of like that was kind of like the Rumsfeld Cheney era. Is that kind of what you mean? Like
Yeah,
Donald
absolutely.
Rumsfeld?
Or even going back before, right, to Ronald Reagan, right?
Yeah.
40 years ago or so, right? That was a Reagan coalition, right? He had white evangelicals in the South, that he would dog whistle to on moral and racial issues, and very pro-capitalist types, and he's militantly anti-communist, right? And he kind of stamped the conservative movement for a long time. But starting with Donald Trump getting elected, you really start to see this three-legged stool not so much break down as coagulate into a new form, because a lot of people on the right became deeply dissatisfied with the way the country was going, and they started to blame the more liberal elements within the conservative movement for letting things get as far as they had on issues like, say, LGBTQ rights or trans rights, for that matter, especially now, right?
Hmm.
Or felt that the country had done too much to allow immigrants into the country because that was good for the economy, or at least it benefited certain kinds of firms, and this was destroying, the nation's distinct culture, which is usually, again, dog whistled in various kinds of white supremacist ways, right? So I argue in this piece that a new three-legged stool is starting to emerge on the right, consisting of new groups who are kind of the intellectual vanguard of conservatism in America circa 2023. And I argue that the new three-legged stool consists of national conservatives, and these are people who tend to think that the chief goal of American policy should be entrenching a kind of solidaristic national culture focused on religion, ethnicity, whatever it happens to be, right? And these people tend to be pretty adamantly anti-immigrant. They're also pretty adamantly pro-Christianity. They think that the state should intervene to try to promote Christian values, even if that comes at the expense of certain other groups, right? And they have a whole host of other policy recommendations along with that. The second leg of the stool are what I call post-liberals, or what are called post-liberals, right? These are people like Patrick Deneen or Adrian Vermeulen or Reno. And these intellectual figures tend to argue that we should have a national culture, yes, and it should be focused on Christianity. But we should maybe intervene more in the economy as well, to try to promote things like family formation, to try to eliminate things like the decay of the nuclear family, which has been wrought because of various kind of feminist adventures, that kind of thing. And then the third leg of the stool are what I call the Nietzschean right. These are people like Bronze Age pervert, who some of your listeners might know, or Richard Hanania, who some of you probably heard of. Sometimes Chris Rufo, echoes in this direction. And these are people who tend to take a much more libertarian approach to the economy, but frame it almost in social Darwinian terms, right? Where they'll say things like, look, the right economy would be one that facilitates the more intelligent members of our society reaching the top, and anything that kind of doesn't abet that is a bad thing, right? And along with this is usually a not very subtle amount of racism, right? So,
Yeah.
people probably are familiar with Anania. He was, a white supremacist for a long time. He claims that he's forsworn that now, except he's still fixated on, African American IQ scores and why it is that they wind up, conducting all this crime, right? But it's this really kind of late 19th century, early 20th century model of how American society is supposed to be, where the stronger, more intellectual types are supposed to rise to the top, and other people are supposed to be at the bottom, right? Now, there's more to say about all new three legs of the stool, but I argue that it's these three groups that form the kind of intellectual, cultural, and artistic vanguard of American conservatism right now, and they're really reshaping it in their own image.
It's just kind of go back. It's just wild that there are people right now, like in 2023. Actually, this episode will come out in 2024. So
Nice.
fuck, 2024. People that are like basing their political beliefs on Nietzsche, like still. Like,
Yeah.
and even the original, even when the Nazis were doing that, that was a perversion of even what he had written then. So I mean, who knows what kind of like just absolutely mishmashed kind of interpretation of that guy's philosophy they're working with at this point. Um,
Yeah, I mean, this has always been an American kind of thing, though. I mean, you probably know Ayn Rand, right?
I've never read an Ayn Rand book. They're very thick, and I've been told that I wouldn't like what's in them. So yeah, fuck that.
Well, you wouldn't, right? And I wouldn't recommend it, right? Because yeah, it's a lot of time for very little of value, right? But she was very influenced by Nietzsche, for example, right? But what she kind of did in many ways was Americanize Nietzsche, right? So Nietzsche was pretty anti-capitalist in a lot of ways, right? Because he felt that these decadent capitalist figures who focused on producing commodities for the lower orders that was too trade and not aristocratic enough. But Ryan Rand's, view was, look, the market is kind of a sorting mechanism if it's left to its own devices, right? Where the more extraordinary people, right, the developers, the innovators, the people who come up with all the new ideas, they will rise in a market economy, and other people will get to benefit from their works. But they certainly have no entitlement to try to, say, tax the wealth that the rich acquire through their own labors and through their own efforts, right? So she kind of Americanized a lot of these Nietzschean ideas about the need for society having a Superman by translating it into a capitalist idiom. And that's been really popular for a lot of people on the American right now. People like Peter Thiel, right, for example,
yeah,
or even see Elon Musk echoing a lot of this kind of language. The idea that, what we need is a ultra businessman who's, polymath, who's going to save us all apparently, but shouldn't be restrained by the state or unions, and definitely doesn't like, DEI programs or anything that puts pressure on their privilege.
yeah. Actually, you kind of hit the nail on the head there for me for why I have not read Ayn Rand. First of all, I don't debate these people. It's not I don't find joy in doing such things. But what I have seen time and time again are the people that I just absolutely consider to be some of the dumbest fucking assholes on the planet that love to quote Ayn Rand or talk about how she influenced them so much and blah blah blah. And it's always some fucking shithead. And also another thing too, like knowing about her whole deal and knowing that she ended up, living off the dole for the rest of her
She did, yeah.
life, taking fucking advantage of Social Security and basically what socialism. She used that to so
She
so
also
fuck
borrowed a lot of money from her family and never paid it back, right?
yeah,
Which they were not happy about because her family wasn't exactly rich when they're in the U.S., right? So yeah,
yeah.
she was very much one of those "do as I say, not as I do" types. Let's put it that way.
Yes. Uh, okay, so we're gonna take a little kind of a turn here into something where I actually have to ask you how to pronounce something before I say it. So ball. Baal. Is that pronounced ball?
Ball.
Baal. When you
Oh yes,
say
ball. Yeah.
when you say okay, I'm sorry. I didn't want to go like Baal and then find out I was being a dumbass. Uh but sorry. Back to your writings. What do you mean when you say between God and Baal? And also what is Baal? Who is
Oh,
Baal?
that's just a cheeky kind of title I came up with, right? So, Baal is a god, right? That is a false god from a kind of Christian perspective, right? But he's often, referenced in the literature as a kind of tempting figure that leads people away from the holy path towards, decadence and materialism, and licentious sex, that kind of thing, right? So, the reason I use that as a section title is because a lot of conservatives, particularly starting in the late 19th century and the early 20th century, argued that our society was moving in an ever more liberal, ever more egalitarian direction, and this meant that respect for traditional patriarchal and Christian values was decaying, and our society was moving ever closer towards a state of sinful decline. And argued that what we need is a restoration of these traditional values in order to bring the country or bring the world back to where it should be. Often framed in these like very apocalyptic terms.
Okay. So is Baal like the devil? Is it from like the Bible or where did it come from?
Yeah, fairly synonymous, right? I mean, look, it's not quite the devil in the sense of being a great antagonist to God that is actively trying to undermine him. He's more of a figure that of temptation, where you can be tempted to have licentious sex or engage in hedonistic gratification or sit there and think that you don't have any kind of responsibilities to the church that are predicated on Christian morality. He was a tempter figure of this sort,
Oh,
or
dude.
used as a
Yeah.
kind of symbolism of the temptations to which we could fall in the event that we deviate from a Christian outlook.
Ball sounds awesome, dude. All right.
He's
So,
probably fun to hang out with, yeah.
yeah, dude. You know what I would not do? I would not pint him in an Irish pub. I
He
would
wouldn't fight
say,
about
I'd say let's go have some licentious sex and have no responsibilities. And
it.
and who's that guy I'm gonna pint? Alexander Dugan. Let's pint Alexander Dugan. No consequences, man.
Oh no, you're right. I mean, Val would definitely be a lot funner. He'd be a much more fun person to get a drink and smoke a dude with than any of the people I've talked about in the book. That's for sure. Maybe not Michael Oakeshott. Michael Oakeshott would be fun to drink with, but everyone else.
So this next question might be a little bit overly simplistic, but I am just like we had said that the right is unified by their hostility towards equality. Is this what always leads right-wing cultures toward war and genocide? Is that a cause and effect? Is there something deeper at play? Like, is this something like inherent in this type of like in fascism? Does it rely on war and genocide? Does it have to happen?
No, it doesn't have to happen, right? And look, a lot of the people that I talk about in the book were relatively pacifistic, right? But they're pacifistic as long as things are going their way, right? So, for instance, during the Reagan era, right? Many conservatives like to present themselves as the faction of moderation, right? Where, the American left had pushed for radical reforms and revolution and then endorsed civil rights movements that, led to chaos in the streets. They were for things like law and order, staying the course, not doing anything that's too risky. And this view of conservatism or the right was popular enough that many people just took it for granted that that's the way they look at things, right? But what I point out in the book is that this by no means exhausts what the right is about, because very often, right, conservatives or right wingers, or certainly the radical right, can come to the conclusion that actually we can't just stay the course, right? That things have gotten so bad and movements for equality have gotten so strong that actually what we need is radical intervention in order to bring things to the way that they should be, or reestablish the hierarchy they think is appropriate, right? And you don't need to take my word for it. Just go read Glenn Almer's piece, "Conservatism is Not Enough" from 2021, right?
Yeah,
Where he says, look, we've had this kind of polite Reaganite attitude in the Republican Party for a really long time, where we think that what we're trying to do is conserve American society, and stay the course. Well, American society isn't worth saving or conserving any longer, right? The vulgar swinish masses have gained control, and they're pushing for more respect for LGBTQ people. They're pushing now for this idea that we should respect trans individuals. The welfare state is starting to creep up again under Joe Biden. So what's worth conserving, right? Conservatism is no longer enough. What we need now is a kind of radical rightism that's going to remake the country the way that it should be, or as they sometimes call it, a new founding or a refounding of the country on right-wing principles. And you see these kinds of right-wing outlooks emerge all around the world, right? Margaret Thatcher was very similar in the 1980s in the United Kingdom, where she said we're going to retransform the country, and we're not even going to change the soul of Britain. Because economics isn't the end of what we're doing; it's just the means to engage in soulcraft. Because
yeah,
Thatcher thought that the country was really going in the wrong direction, because Labour Party and movements had been quite powerful compared to the rest of British history for about 30 or 40 years at that point. And she was going to undo all that, right? So there are more examples that I can give you, but this idea that conservatism is about moderation or restraint is just bogus, right?
yeah.
They're all for moderation and restraint as long as they're getting what they want, right? Or they think that they're getting what they want. But the minute they think that there's too much equality that's appearing in society, boy oh boy, can they be the first people to say let's march on the Capitol, burn down the Senate, and try to replace a current ruling elite with one that's more to our taste.
Yeah, these motherfuckers are delusional too. Because it makes me think of you suggested maybe reading something a little more complex, but also you could just read something as stupid and simple as a Marjorie Taylor Greene
Yeah, yeah.
tweet where she's like, "Well, what we got to do a national divorce," and what she means by that is she wants to start a civil war. which like I don't even know how she thinks she's going to come out on top of a civil war or what a civil war would even
Yeah.
look like.
She grew
And
up in a fucking super rich family also. Like this whole kind of hick persona she comes up with. I'm like, look, there's two things that we can say about this, right? Either one, all of it's an act, in which case you're a fucking liar, or you really are just this fucking dumb. So even though your parents poured millions of dollars into trying to make you smart, you still wound up dumb as shit, right? And boy, oh boy, if people pour millions of dollars into your fucking education and you still come out dumb as shit, you got to be fucking thick as a brick, just baffling to me that she's got the kind of reputation she does.
it's
And the
amazing how many people there are like that have this same background. A lot of people don't know because Kid Rock has always portrayed himself as someone because he came out when Eminem came out, and Eminem grew up in a trailer park, and so Kid Rock was like, "Oh, well, that would work for me. I want to be a white rapper from a trailer park too." But Kid Rock is from like a fucking palatial mansion, one of
yeah,
the wealthiest fucking like neighborhoods in all of Michigan, and he's like he even like raps like I'm straight out the trailer park. Anyway, it's nothing new, I guess. But
oh no, these people are very good at standing as members of the working class, the blue collar class, where they think they're going to gain some kind of advantage from it, right? I mean, fuck, even Trump does that sometimes, right? I mean, Trump used to say, unlike everybody else who was part of the Lucky Sperm Club, I started off with just a little $2 million loan from my dad, and I'm always like, a little $2 million loan, just a little $2 million, to get you fucking started, right? And even that was a lie, right? He got fucking hundreds of millions of dollars from
yeah,
dad, all through his life. It's just fucking ridiculous.
man. All right, cheer me up. Is there any hope that the movement might destroy itself? I've heard rumblings, I've heard rumors, I've heard whispers. Is there is there enough division and you know fissures in the America? Just like let's just say just in America. I mean, worldwide, I know that this is happening in countries all over, obviously all over the world. But here in this nation, what do you think?
Yeah, I think so, right? I mean, look, let's be clear, right? The Republican Party has lost the popular vote in almost every presidential election since you and I were born, right? It's a very unpopular in a lot of the country, in a majority of the country, actually, right? And it's only because of the more esoteric and elitist aspects of the American constitutional electoral order that it continues to be competitive, right? What I worry about the most is that something very similar is going to happen in 2024 as what happened in 2016. Trump will lose the popular vote again, right, by several million. Despite that, he'll eke out a narrow marginal win in a couple of states. And then he's going to take power and he's going to make sure that he never loses it again, right? And that's a worrying scenario, and we'd be fucking pretty foolish to not take that seriously. But there are also a lot of reasons for optimism. Like I said, one way or another, he's almost certainly going to lose the popular vote because most people in the country don't want him to be president, right? I mean, he likes to brag a lot about how, oh, I got the second most ballots cast for me out of any kind of presidential candidate in U.S. history. Well, that's only because more people cast a ballot against him than any other fucking candidate in U.S. history, right? That just goes to show you, the kind of attitude they take towards him. And also, I think that as unappealing as the Biden administration has been in a lot of respects, the economy has done reasonably well. He's been pretty pro-union, and I think that when people take a second look at both candidates, they'll probably think that as inadequate as Biden is in a lot of ways, and for a leftist like me, he is really inadequate. It's better than whatever the fuck the right has to offer right now, right? And I think that you've seen that the last couple of elections when he's run, right? And he lost in 2018, he lost in 2020, he lost in 2022 when he wasn't even on the fucking ballot, but he endorsed a whole bunch of conspiracy theorists and quacks, and people just didn't want it, right? So Trump is a loser politically in a lot of ways. He's threatening, and you'd be foolish to underestimate him the way Hillary Clinton and the Dems did in 2016. But it's not like he's got some guaranteed path to victory. And I think that they can definitely be stopped if everybody commits themselves to doing that.
Yeah, and he's losing a lot of friends because he likes to fuck people over.
He
Uh,
does.
okay, the book is called "The Political Right and Equality: Turning Back the Tide on Egalitarian Modernity." We have barely scratched the surface of this book. I mean, I mean, we, I'm gonna go ahead and just tell everybody like if this was an iceberg, we didn't even look at the tip. So I guess what I just need to ask right now, man, is how can people find you, follow you, and where can they find this book and get to like more to the like, I mean, there's so many central ideas we didn't even have a chance to discuss, and maybe also if you would like to add in a couple more of the central ideas of the book, and kind of, maybe, you know what I'm saying, man.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, look.
uh,
So pe people can add me on Twitter at Matt Paulprof, or you can email me Matt McManus 300 at gmail.com. And yeah, I mean, look, I wrote this book in also part because I think it's important, even for those of us who aren't on the right, to understand the right, because it's a very powerful movement in a lot of ways right now. But like I was saying, also, is by no means, some kind of invincible political force, the way that a lot of people on the right like to present themselves. In America, it's become a minority faction. It has been for a very long time. In a lot of ways, liberalism and pushes for equality are as popular as they've ever been, certainly within my lifetime, right? And the reason for this, I think, is because there is a lot that's good about equality, right? It's very hard to form friendships if you treat people like shit. Or treat people like they're your subordinates. It's very hard to form loving relationships if you treat people like they're your servants or something like that. So I think that, a society where there's more equality, where people treat each other, with respect, right, and try to make sure that everyone has an opportunity for a good life is really appealing to a lot of Americans, a lot of Canadians, a lot of British people, and I'm hoping that that's going to carry us through to victory in 2024. And if it doesn't, then there's always my book, so you can pick it up and read about conservatism to figure out how to push back against another Trump administration.
Hell yeah. Matt, as always, it's a pleasure to have you on the show, and I certainly hope that this is not the last time you'll be here to discuss the many things you write about. I'm always fascinated in, and man, I was gonna say Merry Christmas, but then I realized this won't. This will be 2024 when this comes out. So Happy New Year!
Happy New Year, everybody. Yeah, fuck.
All right, Matt, man, I'll see you soon.
Yeah, you too, man. Take care.